Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Today we're going to be looking back at a really tough event, the Waukesha Christmas Parade attack, November 21, 2021. I know this one hit a lot of you hard.
It certainly did.
And we've gone through a ton of articles, reports, really anything we could find to understand exactly what happened that day, who was involved, what were the legal issues that came after. And our goal today is to really walk through it all, every single detail, and hopefully make sense of the sequence of events from that tragic day.
It's important to acknowledge right from the start the profound impact this had on the entire Waukesha community.
Okay.
And as we unravel this complex story together, we want to do it with sensitivity and a commitment to understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. So to start, just to set the scene, the attack itself took place at 4:39 p.m. Central Time
Right.
during the annual Waukesha Christmas Parade, right there at the corner of Barstow and Main Streets. And tragically, the target was anyone who was there, people watching the parade, people participating.
It was a truly horrific act. And the weapon used was a red 2010 Ford Escape SUV. The driver plowed right through the barricades they had set up. We heard estimates that the speed was around 40 miles per hour.
40 miles an hour through a crowd. I can't even imagine being there in that moment. And sadly, the casualty count was just devastating. 6 people died, and 62 others were injured. The man responsible was identified as 39-year-old Darrell Edward Brooks Jr.
It was chaos. I mean, there were some incredible acts of bravery right away. One police officer even tried to stop the SUV physically by banging on the hood. And when that didn't work, another officer actually fired their gun at the vehicle, trying desperately to stop this rampage.
That must have been so frightening for everyone there. It all happened so fast. And, soon after, videos of the attack started circulating on social media showing just how horrific it was. Eyewitnesses said there was panic everywhere, people screaming, crying. And one detail that really stood out to me was a witness describing the driver. They said he appeared calm and composed. Can you imagine?
It's chilling. And in the investigation that followed, police determined that Brooks intentionally drove into the crowd. And they specifically said he was driving in a zigzag pattern as if he was trying to hit as many people as possible.
It's just awful. And the initial reports, they were already so grim. 5 deaths and 48 injuries confirmed right away. But as the hours passed, more and more information came to light.
Right. The first 5 victims were identified as 4 women and 1 man. And tragically, 4 of those women were members of the Milwaukee Dancing Grannies. They were such a beloved part of the community.
I remember hearing that. Such a tragedy. And on top of that, 28 people had to be hospitalized. 9 of them were in critical condition, and 17 of the injured were children. You can't even fathom the impact on those families.
The worst part is the number of victims continued to climb. By November 23rd, an 8-year-old child passed away from their injuries, bringing the total death toll to 6. The victims ranged in age from 8 to 81 years old. This attack didn't discriminate at all. It affected so many of you in such a profound way.
The entire Waukesha community, everyone came together. There was such a powerful, immediate response.
You could feel it. I mean, right away they issued a shelter-in-place order to keep people safe. It was later lifted, but you can understand why they did that. Schools were closed the next day, and they had grief counselors available for everyone, students, parents, anyone who needed them.
And the community as a whole came together. There were vigils across the city, a moment of silence a week later to remember those who were lost. And Children's Wisconsin, they stepped up and opened a crisis hotline for anyone who was struggling to cope with the trauma.
There really was an outpouring of support. Even First Lady Jill Biden, she visited Waukesha, met with the families, attended a memorial service.
Yeah, it really showed how this tragedy resonated across the country. And then there was the financial support, too. People from all over wanted to help those affected by this.
Right. So much money was raised. Through GoFundMe, the United for Waukesha Community Fund, by March of the following year, those efforts had already raised over $6.2 million. It showed just how many people wanted to offer their help.
And I heard about those local contractors who volunteered their time and skills to build wheelchair ramps for those who had been injured so severely that they needed long-term assistance. That's what community is all about. Even in the face of such darkness, people found a way to help, to show compassion, to show strength.
It really is a testament to the human spirit. We see that so often in these situations.
Absolutely. So now, to really understand what happened, we need to look at the man responsible. Darrell Edward Brooks Jr., like we said, he was arrested soon after the attack.
He was 39 at the time, born in Milwaukee, February 21st, 1982. And what we found in the reports is that he had a long criminal history, going all the way back to 1999.
We looked into his past. He grew up in Milwaukee, raised by his mother. His father wasn't in the picture. But from what we understand, his mother was very supportive. His grandmother mentioned that he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder at age 12. And he had a history of mental health struggles. Unfortunately, he never finished high school. He got his first felony charge when he was just 17.
And his arrest for this attack, it was kind of unusual. He actually went up to someone, asked for help calling an Uber. Didn't even realize that this person already knew about the attack.
Is that right?
Yeah. The resident offered him a sandwich, a jacket, just trying to be kind. And then the police arrived, and Brooks surrendered without any resistance.
It's hard to fathom what could drive someone to do something like this, but early on, investigators believed that he acted alone, and they couldn't find any connection between him and any of the victims. There was some talk in the news about whether he was maybe running from something, like a domestic dispute or something.
Yeah, there were those rumors.
Yeah.
And the police chief did confirm that Brooks had been involved in a domestic disturbance just before the attack. However, he wasn't being chased by the police when he drove into the parade. That's a crucial point. Later on, prosecutors would say that he deliberately targeted the parade. They believed that he was trying to hurt as many people as possible.
And looking back at his criminal record, it's extensive. Charges in Manitowoc in 2005, then in Wisconsin Rapids in 2010. And he even had an outstanding warrant from 2016, a statutory sex crime in Sparks, Nevada.
It's a lot.
And he was registered as a sex offender in Wisconsin since 2020.
Right. And just before the Waukesha attack, it seems like things were really escalating for him. July 2020, he's charged with recklessly endangering safety, being a felon in possession of a firearm. He was released on bail in February 2021, but then 5 months before the Waukesha attack, he's arrested again. Domestic violence this time, in Georgia.
It's unbelievable. And then, 3 weeks before the parade attack, he's arrested again, this time for punching his ex-girlfriend and running her over with his car. Can you believe that?
It's almost too much to process.
And get this, he was released on a $1,000 bail just 2 days before the parade. And for those charges, he was eventually sentenced to 9 years in prison. But that was in September 2024.
So after the parade attack, the charges against Brooks were serious, of course. 5 counts of first-degree intentional homicide. And then after the 6th victim died, that was bumped up to 6 counts.
And while he was in jail, he did an interview with Fox News where he said he felt demonized. His mother also spoke out, wrote about his struggles with mental illness and how they couldn't afford to get him proper treatment. And if that wasn't enough, he was later charged with intimidating a witness, his ex-girlfriend, from jail, trying to stop her from talking to investigators.
It's a complicated case for sure, and the legal proceedings were long and unusual. The final list of charges against Brooks: 61 counts of first-degree recklessly endangering safety, 6 counts of hit and run involving death, 2 counts of felony bail jumping, and 2 counts of domestic abuse.
Wow. 61 counts of recklessly endangering safety. That really shows how many lives were at stake that day. So a pretrial hearing took place in January 2022, and the court commissioner decided there was enough evidence to go to trial. And during that hearing, a police detective testified about how Brooks was intentionally swerving his vehicle, even as officers were yelling at him to stop.
And the defense, they tried to argue that Brooks was intoxicated during the attack and that he didn't intend to kill anyone. But the prosecution came back strong. They said he had so many chances to stop the car and that being drunk wasn't an excuse for what he did.
It sounds like they had a strong case against him. So then in February 2022, Brooks pleaded not guilty to all the charges. And his defense team, they requested a change of venue. They argued that he wouldn't get a fair trial in Waukesha County because of the community's reaction to the attack, the whole Waukesha Strong movement. They also wanted a new judge on the case.
The court denied the change of venue. They said an impartial jury could still be found. But they did assign a new judge to the case, Chief Judge Jennifer Doro. And the trial date was set for October 3, 2022. And just before jury selection, 1 count of domestic battery was dropped.
And then things took another unexpected turn. Brooks asked to represent himself at trial.
Right. The judge warned him about how complicated it would be, but ultimately she agreed.
Wow.
So then you have Brooks trying to make these sovereign citizen arguments in court. He claimed he wasn't subject to the government's laws, but the judge shut that down quickly. She said those arguments had no legal basis.
So everyone listening, just to be clear, sovereign citizen arguments, they don't hold any weight in court. They've been rejected time and time again.
Exactly. And Brooks's behavior during the trial, it wasn't good. There were constant interruptions, outbursts. He just refused to follow the rules of the courtroom. And eventually, the judge ruled that he had lost his right to call witnesses because of his behavior.
unbelievable. Even during his closing arguments, he tried to bring up jury nullification, the idea that the jury can acquit someone even if they believe they broke the law.
Yeah. The prosecution immediately objected, and the judge told the jury to ignore it.
So finally, on October 26, 2022, the jury delivered their verdict. After deliberating for about 3 hours, they found Brooks guilty on all 76 charges.
The sentencing hearing was held on November 16, 2022, and the judge handed down a very serious sentence: 6 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, one for each of the victims who died in the attack, plus another 762.5 years in prison for the reckless endangerment charges, and then an additional 150 years for the hit-and-run charges.
So he's never getting out.
No, never.
And after the sentencing, Brooks filed an appeal. He was also placed on suicide watch in prison. First, he was held at the Dodge Correctional Institution here in Wisconsin. Then he was transferred to the Wisconsin Secure Program facility. That's a supermax prison. And then in January 2025, he was moved to another prison, but they haven't disclosed where.
There were so many reactions to this tragedy from all over, from government officials, community leaders, really everyone. Governor Tony Evers offered his condolences and ordered flags to be flown at half-staff across the state. President Biden condemned the attack, and even both of Wisconsin's senators. They put aside their political differences and issued a joint statement urging people not to politicize this tragedy.
And religious leaders also offered words of comfort. Pope Francis sent a message of prayer and condolences to the victims and their families. Waukesha County Executive Paul Farrow also asked for prayers for everyone affected.
Right. And one of the biggest controversies that came out of this was the fact that Brooks had been released on such a low bail just days before the attack. He had that domestic violence case, and he only had to pay $1,000 to get out.
Yeah.
This sparked a national debate about bail reform.
Yeah, it raised some serious questions about how bail is set, especially in cases of domestic violence.
Well, the Milwaukee District Attorney's Office did admit that the bail was inappropriately low. They said it was human error. An assistant district attorney was overworked and made a mistake, and the court commissioner who set the bail, they were reassigned indefinitely.
And then there was a reaction from extremist groups, something we always need to be mindful of. The ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, reported that white supremacist groups were using Brooks's social media posts, which had some black nationalist and anti-Semitic views, and they were using the attack itself to push their own racist and anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. They tried to say the attack was racially motivated, even though law enforcement said there was no evidence of that.
Sadly, this happens so often. These groups exploit tragedies like this to spread hate and fear. It adds another layer of pain for the victims and the community.
It's disgusting. So we've covered a lot today. The timeline of the attack itself, Darrell Brooks's past, his trial, the sentencing, the community's reaction, the issues with the bail system, and the way extremist groups tried to exploit this tragedy.
It's really hard to wrap your head around all of it. The violence was so sudden. But then you see the strength of the Waukesha community, the way they came together to support each other. And then there's Brooks's story. His mental health struggles, his history of violence, and then the legal process itself. It was so complex, with all the unusual turns. Brooks representing himself, those sovereign citizen arguments, it was unlike anything we've seen before.
Yeah, and it really makes you think, what does something like this tell us about individual responsibility, about the power of community, about how we seek justice when something so horrible happens? We focused on the Waukesha attack, but the themes here, violence, loss, the search for answers, they're universal. These are issues that affect all of us.
Absolutely. We hope this deep dive has helped you to understand what happened in Waukesha.
Yeah.
But we also hope it encourages you to think about these bigger questions. These are things we all need to grapple with as a society. If you're interested in learning more, there are plenty of resources available online and in your communities, and we encourage you to explore them, to learn, to reflect, and to think about how we can prevent tragedies like this from happening again.
Well said. And thank you all for listening to The Deep Dive. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a new topic. Until then, stay informed, stay engaged, and take care.